It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler. It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler.
Hey guys, Tyler here. More recently, the Secret Service director has recently resigned from her position. Now, prior to her actually resigning to her position, it seemed as though that there were like a series of questions and answers directly from congressmen and congresswomen about the various issues surrounding the Trump assassination attempt. And there was this one video clip that I wanted to respond to, and so without further hesitation, let's respond to it.
And I want to talk about training, and I want to talk about the fact that there's been a little bit of dancing around as it relates to this being a suspicious person and this being a situation that was perceived to be a threat. And it seems as if there's a different analysis that takes place. One of my questions has to do with if you have any bias training that your officers undergo. And the reason that I ask that, because as a civil rights lawyer, I have learned so many times in having to deal with law enforcement that there usually is not a perception of a threat when it is a young white male, even if they are carrying a long gun. Yet a lot of times, at least in this country, when it comes to law enforcement, there is a perceived threat just by somebody having a little bit more melanin in their skin. So I'm curious to know, because a lot of times, one of the things that we have consistently pushed for on my side of things, and when I say my side, is once we are looking at a tragedy in which law enforcement made an error, is the bias training and whether or not our officers are getting it. So I'm curious to know, in some of the training that you talk about that is part of your budget, has bias training been part of that?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, you guys heard that correctly. One of the questions that was actually asked towards the former Secret Service director was if the employees of Secret Service received some sort of racial bias test. Now, first and foremost, let's get this straight. There is actually no type of evidence whatsoever that racial bias tests actually work. Now, this comes directly from the Scientific American. The problem with implicit bias training is well motivated, but there is little evidence that it leads to meaningful change in behavior. While implicit bias test trainings are multiplying, few rigorous evaluations of these programs exist. There are exceptions. Some implicit bias interventions have been conducted empirically among healthcare professionals and college students. These interventions have proven to lower scores on the implicit association test, the most commonly used implicit measurement of prejudice and stereotyping. But to date, none of these interventions have been shown to result in permanent long-term reduction of implicit bias scores, or more importantly, sustain and meaningful changes in behavior. There is consistent evidence that bias training done the wrong way, lukewarm diversity training, can actually have the opposite impact, inducing anger and frustration among white employees. What it all means is that despite the widespread calls for implicit bias training, it will likely be inefficient at best. At worst, it's a poor use of limited resources that could cause more damage and exacerbate the very issues it's trying to solve. What's even more crazy to me about that particular video is the fact that the speaker seems to suggest that if the person who was a shooter was not necessarily white, that if the shooter was in fact black, that it's actually easier for somebody to shoot down the shooter if they were black in comparison to somebody who was actually white.
There's been a little bit of dancing around as it relates to this being a suspicious person and this being a situation that was perceived to be a threat. And it seems as if there's a different analysis that takes place. One of my questions has to do with if you have any bias training that your officers undergo. And the reason that I ask that, because as a civil rights lawyer, I have learned so many times in having to deal with law enforcement that there usually is not a perception of a threat when it is a young white male, even if they are carrying a long gun.
This comes directly from New Washington State University. It says right here, even tired cops are more hesitant to shoot at black suspects. It says right here, in an early study led by Lewis James, scientific testing of a sample of white officers revealed that overall they hesitated significantly longer before shooting armed suspects who were black compared to armed suspects who are white or Hispanics, and that they are 25 less likely to erroneously shoot unarmed black suspects than they were unarmed white suspects. If she really wants to play the race card and say, well, you see, if the guy was actually black, it's actually easier for you to kill that person, the data shows otherwise. Because the shooter for the case of the Trump assassination attempt was actually white, that would mean that the people, based upon the study, are more likely to shoot the guy because he's white. So even by that logic, it just simply makes no sort of sense in terms of the argumentation. But I don't understand, why exactly does everything have to be about race? We're talking about the former president getting assassinated, and here we are talking about whether or not cops have some sort of implicit bias against black people. It makes no sort of sense. It's like comparing apples to oranges. It has nothing to do with this particular topic matter whatsoever. But anyway, what do you guys think about my response to the video? Tell me in the comment section down below. And as always, I'll see you guys next video.
It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler. It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler. It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler.